Starting off, young David Banner protests to his supervisor, Colonel Thaddeus Ross, that he can give the human immune system an upgrade, but the colonel forbids him from human test subjects. So he makes the sensible decision to test the serum on himself. Once he gets home, his wife Edith Banner breaks the news that she's gonna have a baby.
I'm gonna have a baby.
The editing and cinematography back in '03 was utterly stellar, as Edith immediately gives birth the very next scene, a cute little baby boy named Bruce Banner. Some years pass, and the small Bruce smiles at his mother gardening. More years pass, and Christmas comes. Bruce gets a cute dinosaur plushie for the holidays. Aww. Followed by the haunting scene of David testing on his own son and writing down the results. We have a runner-up for Father of the Year. More years now, and Bruce gets bullied, but he seems to be numb to it. His mother doesn't really think too much of it though. Colonel Ross sniffs out that David had human samples in his lab, so the colonel here ejects his microscope and himself from the project due to the violation of terms.
It's government business.
David gets so angry and riled up that he causes an industrial meltdown, causes the whole building to be on red alert, and a mass evacuation's being done.
Evacuate immediately.
David comes home, drags Edith away to a room, and shuts the door behind him. Look at little Bruce playing with his cute little toys. Now look at him being traumatized beyond repair from what he can hear behind that door. A more mature Bruce gets woken up by his mother. Oh wait, this is Mrs. Krenzler, his foster mom. Apparently, Bruce forgot about his early memories.
Another nightmare.
But he just ignores it and packs up for college afterwards. Mrs. Krenzler wishes him luck and thinks he'll grow up to be a great scientist. This hug helps the time skip, as we're taken to the now Bruce Banner, a hunk shaving his 5 o'clock shadow away, and strangely has green eyes. He bikes to the Berkeley Nuclear Biotechnology Institute, and we're greeted by a familiar-looking old man. Wink wink. Bruce didn't sleep too well for his big day and even gets teased by his nerdy friend Harper. Bruce is asking him to prep the samples. Then he meets his boo, Betty Ross. Well, at the moment it's complicated. Bruce apologizes for his kinda scummy behavior, but Betty essentially says that she can fix him. Relationships aside, they're quite stressed with this upcoming review for their lab.
Well then, let's go be impressive.
We're then taken to said lab where Betty, Harper, and Bruce do some experiments with his big frog. They begin the procedure, and Freddy the frog begins to take the dose of gamma radiation. The exposure's released, while their own product, the nanomeds, seem to be keeping up with healing the frog. Sadly, there seems to be a chemical imbalance and causes Freddy the frog to pop like a pimple. Bruce and Betty drink the results off. Then their conversation steers to Bruce's parents. He doesn't want to find out what happened to him, and frankly, he's quite annoyed Betty keeps bringing it up. The next day, Betty's greeted by Glenn Talbot. The two take the elevator and Glenn says he's basically running all of the labs in the base now. They reach the lab and Betty smells something's up, so she straight up asks him what he wants.
What do you want?
Glenn says he's impressed with Betty's research so far, so he offers her a job, some patent offers, and 10 times the pay. Nice. Betty gives him her boots and the door, and Bruce arrives just in time to watch the walk of shame. Somewhere else, General Ross has clocked in a few miles since we last saw him, and he gets a report about a lab acquisition by Glenn, but they hold back because the General's daughter, Betty, is associated with that particular lab. Later, Betty meets a new janitor, because the old one mysteriously passed. Something fishy's already going on here. Bruce, on the other hand, remembers some photographic memories with Betty, like this one trip they had to the woods.
Tell me about your dream.
From that flashback, Betty has a dream of her own where her younger self was eating ice cream with General Ross. But he's suddenly called for duty, and poor little Betty is left all alone in the ice cream parlor. In the far distance, a green nuclear explosion is seen. Then young Betty is comforted by a mature Bruce. Bruce, in present of course, doesn't want to hurt her. Then Bruce's flashback ends and he leaves the lab for the night. That is until a poofy pooch grabs his interest. As he was about to pet it, it suddenly becomes hostile, so he left. The new janitor from earlier sneaks into Bruce and Betty's lab where he grabs a hair sample. Further in the night, Bruce is left to ponder his research at his home. Like Betty, Bruce gets a trippy nightmare about voices from his past. That causes him to wake up and check the windows. He sees a man with 2 dogs. When he looks back, they're gone. Back at some shady-looking den, the janitor does some proper lab work with the substances he stole from the Banner Ross labs. It appears as he's trying to replicate that DNA experiment Banner and the company were doing. The next day comes and Bruce opens up his lab, only to find Betty with Glenn. Bruce doesn't like this guy, so he's asking him to leave immediately. Instead of leaving though, he makes it clear that he wants what Bruce's team has discovered and plans on bringing it to the military. Bruce also makes it clear that he wants his science for the good of everyone.
We're doing the basic science.
But Glenn berates him for it, and then he leaves. Later in the testing chamber, Betty's clarifying that she'll handle Glenn by using her quite estranged father to rattle him.
There's nothing to talk about.
Harper, working in the chamber, says he needs to help with some of the circuits. So Bruce comes over. He suddenly shorts one of the circuits and gets stuck. Bruce helps him out, but the gamma radiation exposure process starts counting down. Betty can't stop it, and Harper can't get out. So like the Chad that he is, Bruce body blocks the incoming radiation. Now he wakes up in one of the infirmaries, and Betty's visiting him. He's asking how's Harper, and she says he's fine, but he's going to take a break from lab work. Betty's dumbfounded how he's still alive, but Bruce says that the nanomeds have worked tremendously.
They worked.
He's so healthy that even the doctor wanted to know where he got his energy. Betty was still traumatized over the possibility of having to watch Bruce end himself, but he says he's never felt better. Night approaches, and Bruce is shaken up in his sleep, having a bizarre dream of reptiles and nature. Then a big green man opens the door. He wakes up to find the janitor with 2 dogs next to him. He clarifies his real name is Bruce Banner.
Bruce Banner.
And not Bruce Kensler. This creep also reveals he's kept his eye on him for a while now. The janitor says that he can reveal everything to him, but Bruce understandably gets creeped out and asks him to leave. He then reveals to be David Banner. Dad's gone full hobo mode. Bruce couldn't believe it, and David says whatever he's been told are all lies, and he's been put away for 30 years until now.
30 years.
The phone rings, but David stops Bruce from answering it. He says there's something about Betty that's off. Bruce loudly tells him to just get out, so he makes his way to the door. In the jury-rigged lab, David does some more sciencey sciences. And then the night passes, and Betty takes a sample while telling Bruce he's about to meet her father. So let's all accompany Betty to the restaurant. She greets her father, then they sit and menus are given. General Ross gets into the meat of the conversation, the real identity of Bruce. Of course, the general can't divulge top secret info, so Betty goes into a bit of a fit.
What is it that you know about him?
Since she thought that her dad wanted to see her again. Sadly, it's not the case, and this breaks up. In a literally green-lit lab, Bruce does some research on his cells, with large amounts of data coming in. He's reminded of what David said, and soon this gives him a bit of a shakedown. The phone rings, but he doesn't answer, so the caller, Betty, leaves him a message. She says that her father might suspect him of something shady, and they might use it as an excuse to take over the lab. Bruce has a ton of flashbacks before being visibly molding. He fumbles and struggles to walk in the halls as he begins to mutate. Walls get cracked, and soon rooms and labs get destroyed as the rage of the Hulk is first unleashed to the world. Chemicals and collateral damage galore as the security calls for backup to arrive on the scene. The Hulk makes it to the gamma machine and throws it out of the building. Soon he spots David hiding in a closet with fear. He comes out slowly to behold his giant green son. Bruce's memories suddenly come back to him, and his rampage continues, with him bursting through the ceiling. He makes his getaway while David is left in cold fear. The night of destruction is over, and Betty arrives at Bruce's house, where she finds Bruce lying down on the bed half naked. Betty's like there was an explosion in the labs. Cool story, babe, but get this. Bruce suddenly had a breathtaking dream of being reborn, and there was lightning in his face. Betty's asking if he was at the lab during the incident, but he denies it. Bruce then recalls the new janitor claiming to be his dad.
Said it was my father.
Story interrupted as there's a knock on the door, and it's Betty's father and some guys in suits. General Ross greets him and says he's left his wallet at the scene of the crime. The general wants his daughter to be escorted to safety, but she doesn't want to. Bruce says he'll be fine. So Betty softly storms to her car where she's tailed by the general. He says he vows that there's some bad past behind Bruce, and the general will get to the bottom of it. For now though, she's going to stay away just for her own safety. Betty uses her brilliant mind to trail and dox the new janitor. Soon she gets to his dumpy estate and he welcomes her in. Betty cuts to the chase and asks about Bruce. So they take their seats. Bruce's memories were hazy, so she's asking David what he knows about it. Betty admits her father is involved, which is already a red flag for David due to their past encounters. He's getting a bit riled up, so he pays her a few compliments and then reveals that it's too late for Bruce. David doesn't want to intervene as well because the general doesn't want anything to do with him. So David sends Betty on her way. And speaking of the general, here he is interrogating Bruce, insisting on him telling the truth about what happened. Well, he gets antsy as he reveals that he's the one that had his father locked up for so long, but Bruce doesn't buy it because he was always told his parents were dead. The general insists he saw the incident of David when he was 4.
We're 4 years old when you saw it.
But Bruce doesn't really know. Ross then locks him out of the remains of the lab, then threatens to gulag him if he's ever remotely close to his daughter. Back at David's compound, the piece of cloth that Betty partly sat on is thrown by David to his dogs, probably to get her scent and hunt her down. At Bruce's home, he scopes out the scene and his house is swarmed with guards in suits. A hidden phone rings from the couch and Bruce answers it. It's David. He reveals that he knows about the general's plans to have him locked up for life, and that during his early years he experimented on himself, and that the deformity was passed on to Bruce.
And passed on to me.
David wants to harvest its power, but Bruce wants to cure himself, so David also tells him about the housewarming canine present that has been sent there and that the DNA samples of Bruce were to cultivate David's own Hulk serum. Bruce slowly becomes enraged, but Glenn comes in to butt heads with him. Glenn's tussling with him, but big mistake cause now he's becoming angry and green. Hulk shows Glenn the door, or rather the window, and the suits open fire on him. His response? Get angrier and bigger. He uses Glenn as a frisbee for another guy. Then he jumps off. At Betty's log cabin, she's busy drawing, until a bump in the night is heard. She investigates, and it's big old Brucey hiding behind a tree. He gently approaches Betty and lifts her up to her car. They share a few goo-goo-eye moments until the giant pack of hounds arrive. Bruce puts Betty in the car and then he roughhouses with the giant pooches. The Hulk gets swarmed and he's bitten everywhere. So this pisses him off and he starts letting fists fly. Their fight dredges on the top of the trees until they all fall off. The freaky poodle claws the car Betty's in, but Hulk's occupied with the mud on his neck. So he gives it a devastating ground pound. The poodle's flung off, but the last mud claws on the same neck spot, so Hulk becomes angrier and just rips it apart. The battle's done and he retreats to the lake, where he reverts back to his lanky human self.
He sent his dogs, didn't he?
He struggles to waddle towards Betty, but there's some extra anger left in him. Good thing he snaps out of it, and Betty escorts him to her bedroom. She infers that it must be a combination of the nanomeds they made and the gamma exposure. But Bruce says his father put an extra ingredient long before. He also says that his father was the one that sent the dogs. And the next morning, General Ross gets a call from Betty, saying she's scared. Betty tells Bruce that his anger is the one causing the nanomeds to act up. Stuff like serious trauma and repressed memories are the prime suspects of his anger. Bruce says when he loses control, he admits to liking it.
I like it.
Bruce is tranked, and he's transported via helicopter escort to an undisclosed desert location. There's a hidden, far underground location where he's sedated for as long as his life, at least according to the general. Now Betty feels betrayed because her father won't unsedate him. Betty desperately wants to help him, but the general is threatened because of what his father did, and he might follow in his footsteps. Betty wants to know what David did to him.
I want you to help him!
So the SWAT go and raid David's compound, but he's already 3 steps ahead by rebuilding the gamma radiation machine. Soon he doses himself with that gamma as well. It works, and he regrows a wound, but also can take form of objects that he touches. A poor cop walks in on him, so David crushes him. Somewhere in the base, Bruce wakes up to Betty, and they take a walk in an abandoned town that Bruce used to live in. A convoy of soldiers also looks after him. Moments later, Bruce finds and recognizes his old house. He takes a little stroll, but he's somewhat frustrated, so he opts to leave. Betty wants him to try and remember his memories.
Please try.
And soon he gets a few fragments. This includes the room where his father might have ended his mother, but all they're left with is an empty room. Their walk ends. And the following day, Betty loses access to him. The general says that the NSA decided to turn Bruce over to Atheon, which General Ross is immensely angry at Glenn for crossing him. Now the general sends Betty home because it's out of his hands, so Betty is flown back.
You can go home now.
Now back at the facility, Bruce meets the injured degenerate known as Glenn, and he wants to carve off a piece of meat to study and exploit for money. Bruce doesn't oblige, so he shocks him, trying to make him angry and go green. Glenn tries with his pathetic limbs but fails. Sadly, they seal off Bruce in a water chamber, where Bruce is experimented upon. Betty comes home and she has a guest. It's David. He says he's got no gripes with her anymore, and requests for Betty to turn him in, and at least let him see Bruce one last time. Sadly, Betty says it's out of her father's hands.
It's out of my father's hands now.
So David goes on a God complex rant. He recalls what really happened during that day. He was supposed to end Bruce out of mercy, but dredges Edith instead. Right off the bat, Bruce wakes up and they try to drill him, but the Hulk busts free. Glenn and his cronies try to gas him, but he breaks through the walls.
I put him to sleep.
The general sees this, but Glenn says they're foaming him as they speak. Ross doesn't trust him, so he calls for an evacuation, but Glenn goes with a lockdown. He personally goes to Hulk to try and get a sample off of him, but it just makes him madder. Glenn shoots him with an explosive, but it ricochets off him, and he gets swallowed by that explosion. Try as they might, all the guns and security isn't enough to contain the Hulk. So he finally surfaces in the desert. He jumps to his old home and remembers his dad being taken away. Think fast. Flashback interrupted by artillery shell. He escapes to a desert where he battles tanks. Ross notifies the general about Angry Man.
Bad news, sir.
So they give him more military power. The Hulk escapes to a peaceful valley, but his quality time is interrupted by Comanches led by General Ross. These birds are no match for the Hulk though. Ross finds out he's headed for Betty, so he warns her, while the Hulk arrives at San Francisco. Even though some F-22s attack him, and he saves one of them, they still try to suffocate him into the high altitude. He passes out and plummets into the sea. Betty contacts her father to see if she can go to him to calm him down, since missiles and bullets only made him angrier, therefore stronger.
I have to destroy him.
Meanwhile, downtown San Francisco, the Hulk bursts out of the crevices and causes a scene. He was about to lob a rock to one of the approaching helicopters, but he spotted Betty. Ross asks all units to hold their fire, and the Hulk is surrounded by military, SWAT, and police. All guns pointed at him, but he calms down because his best girl is there. As Betty gets closer, the Hulk slowly changes back into Banner. The two reunite in a heartfelt embrace, while all the feds slowly surround him. At jail, some military men ask David to take a little trip with them. David arrives at a hangar where the general and Betty are. David's glaring at the general. Then he's escorted to the holding apparatus where Bruce is. They exchange lethal threats as a greeting. Then Bruce recalls seeing his mother in a dream. He breaks out crying, but he's still hostile towards David. He shows his true color by only caring about the Hulk, so he wants the Hulk's power for complete global saturation. Bruce refuses and screams for him to leave. But David bites on some wire and he drains the city dry of power. Bruce transforms as well and battles his father into the skies, where they end up in a lake to brawl it out. David turns into everything that Hulk throws at him. So Hulk overloads him with gamma radiation, but so does the military with that gamma-charged missile. A year suddenly passes, and Betty gets a call from her dad regarding if Bruce survived or not in that blast. Somewhere in a Spanish country in the jungle, a bearded doctor defends a bunch of poor people from the government's military. He says they won't like it when he's angry. It's Bruce. Time to cool off, cause that was it for the Hulk. Thanks for chilling with us, guys. What'd you think about this angry movie? Let us know in the comments below with that hashtag cinema recap. This was The Hulk by Marvel Studios, starring Eric Bana, Jennifer Connelly, and Sam Elliott. Until that next rage-filled episode, see you later.